joining us today.
Great. So this lecture is not all about me, so I'll try and disappear as soon as I give it over to Clinton. But I just wanted to say that it's not often that one gets to become close with one's hero. So in Montreal, I used to use Dr. Clinton Bailey's work from every aspect to his understanding of Bedouin law, his unique grasp of Bedouin Arabic, which is rather different than the spoken Arabic or even the Fusha, and the first the privilege just to meet him and then to get to know him and then to actually be in his home was all just unbelievable joy and privilege. But the experience I wanted to share was a couple of years ago, actually the year when COVID first hit. Clinton came by to both speak to my students about the Bedouin, about their culture, and also to be part a surprise, basically, because there's a movie on Ben Gurion's life called Epilogue, which just came out a few years ago that had been lost in the archives for decades, and it was recently found. The volume, the sound had been lost, just the film footage. They found the sound, put it together, and it was a huge hit. It still is a hit in Israel in the film festivals, and just as part of a very important aspect of Ben Gurion's life. But what we don't tell our students when we play the movie is that the young interviewer who sits with Ben Gurion in stable care and asks him about his life as he's looking back on his incredible role in terms of the role he played on the creation of the State of Israel, is that the interviewer is Clinton Bailey, who had a personal friendship and relationship both with Ben Gurion and his wife. So shortly after we showed the movie, and then after he gave his lecture on the Bedouin, Clinton tells me he wants to go visit some friends. We're in the middle of nowhere in the desert. He makes me take my car and drive him, and he says, "Take a right here, take a left here." I'm driving at nighttime in the desert with no lights. Mm-hmm. He's telling me go right. I didn't know where I was. Complete darkness, just with my headlights. He found this family. I don't know, what were the names again?
Abu Blaya.
The Abu Blaya family. They came out delighted to see him, sat us down. We spent several hours by the fire eating traditional Bedouin foods that Clinton will show you soon. And it was just remarkable to see him. In fact, in my next, I have a couple of slides of Clinton there speaking with them, chatting away in Bedouin Arabic, totally comfortable in this lifestyle. And they obviously have known him their entire lives as little children. He knows them intimately, their poetry, their oral poetry, their way of life. This is not a typical scholar. This is somebody who is truly dedicated his life understanding and becoming part of the culture. Mm-hmm. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Clinton, and I think how to make him focus more on like this. Here we go.
Yes. Okay. Good evening or good morning to you people out in California. And we've had a very warm summer. We've had a very warm winter, and it was rather surprising for me and a few friends that I have in your area to see and on television and to read about the snow. And most people don't associate snow with Southern California, and just coincidentally, not many people associate Bedouin with Judaism or the Bible. Now, and in a certain respect, that's understandable, because although we find the ancient Israelites, beginning with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and many others, we find them in the Bible and doing things that are Bedouin-like. In other words, I'll give you some examples in just a few minutes. That has never been accepted we think of Abraham as a nomad, and we think of the tents of Jacob and things of that sort. And you'll find many synagogues called the tent of Jacob, and here and there in America as well. But in any case, we in the mid 20th century, there got to be a movement of archaeologists and sociologists who were influenced by currents in these fields around Europe and in America, and they came out very strongly against Abraham being a nomad and all the things that we see and we read in the Bible were denied by them. And so when I met the Bedouin and began to study them, and that was in the mid 1960s, I I received a lot of criticism about going into a subject that has been discredited. And so, but they interested me. And the fact is that I didn't study their ethnography in order to prove that there's some connection with the Bible. I saw them, when I first met them, and I met them by moving down to the Negev when I was in my early 30s. And I met them and realized that they're an old culture. I thought at the time that they were probably as old as the Bible. It now occurs to me, after having studied them and recorded their culture of surviving under desert conditions. That's the key to it. You live in the desert, you have to survive there, and the conditions are not like they are in most other places in the world, because as you see now, there's not much vegetation and not much water, certainly. And the people who have decided in the various deserts of the Middle East to live in the desert, to live out there in the desert, found something in it. They like it. But they couldn't live as people did in ancient times. Most people either lived by crafts if they lived in settled areas, or they lived by agriculture. But because of the lack of rain, they couldn't engage in agriculture. So they had to resort to living by raising animals, goats, camels, as we see here, certain types of sheep, special types that can endure arid climates. And but they have to have a special culture they have to have a special way of life in order to do that. We have the next picture. So one way of living in the desert is to raise animals, as I just said, animals that are able to live under arid conditions. But it never rains in one spot in the desert. So therefore, if in order to find pasture the greenery that comes up after rain. In separate places and distant places, they had to move looking for pasture from one place to another. And that's why they're nomadic. They move. And in order to be nomadic, they had to have tents. In other words, they had to be able to pick up, let's say, within an hour and get on the road again very often. And they'd get to a certain pasture area, and they'd get to a certain pasture area and stay there for a few days, depending on how much pasture there was, and then move on. And this was all over the desert areas of the Middle East, particularly the Arabian Peninsula, where we today find the United Emirates and the Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and these places. You look at a map, you see them all quite clearly, and they had to move from place to place. And because they moved from place to place in a very uninhabitable area, they did not have government. They were on their own. And governments who only got established on the periphery of the deserts and rarely dared to go inside, where the natives, the Bedouin, knew the desert and knew how to outfox them. The Bedouin themselves did not have any protection. And so a very large part of their culture was to set up an alternative to government, and that's the tribal system. Myself, my clan, maybe 5, 6 generations, and then people who once were in my clan but have moved on beyond the 5 generations, and they constitute a tribe, and several tribes that have not been one unit for very, very long constitute a tribal confederation, which can go over hundreds and thousands of square miles. So that was one aspect of their life. They had to find out how to be safe. So let me give you a few examples of how they did that. I just gave you one. They formed government based on blood, based on ancestry. In other words, I can trust the person who has the same ancestry as mine and the same ancestors and bloodline. I can trust them. And they very often have to sacrifice their lives in order to protect me, and I may have to sacrifice my life to protect them. So we're a society, and a society that is always on the move, and we rarely even meet each other, but we have the same rules and the same laws, the same behavior. And so they did that. And second to that, they also they had to find a system of protecting themselves, and that is revenge. And this has gone on now for a very long time. In other words, if David here is my cousin, and somebody comes up and violates him in any way, takes something of his, or hits him, attacks him, or his daughter, or all the many ways in which a person can violate David, I have to make sure that that person understands that it is forbidden to attack us and that they're going to suffer to the same extent that David suffered. And by extension, that we suffered, and we, his clan, for example. And because people are going to look at us now and say, so and so hit David. Now, does that mean that David's people are so weak that nobody pays attention to the damage they can cause us? And so I have to, or I, the leader of the group at the time, has to dispel that image. He has to create deterrence. So from now on, everyone in the whole desert, or whoever we might come in contact with, space-wise, they are afraid to bother us. And that's our protection. And there's a nice little story in the Bible of Jacob when he comes back to the land that was promised to Abraham and to Isaac. And he comes back from Syria and northern Jordan, where he was raising sheep for his distant relative, and eventually married his daughters. He lived with Laban, and he lived with Laban and married Rachel and Leah, and then at some point he felt he had to leave there, and came back to what we call Canaan. In other words, the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And when he got there, he was in the Nablus area. And it says in the Bible, tells the story that what we know as his single daughter, another single in the sense of his only daughter, Dinah, went out to meet the shepherdesses of the local people, who were the people of the Nablus area. So she went out there, and a fellow called Shem ben Hamor, who is the son of the leader of the Nablus people, he saw her and got a liking for her and took advantage of her. In other words, he raped her, even if it was statutory. That's not mentioned in the Bible, but it's irrelevant. And she came home and told her brothers about what happened, and they were very angry, it says in the Bible, and they decided that they had to take revenge on the people of Nablus. So, and in particular, we're told that Jacob's sons, Simon and Levi, were the people who instigated this attack. And so they they called the Nablus people in, including the boy and his father, and said, you know, you've done this thing to us, and we're very angry, and we can't allow it to pass. So they said, look, don't get us wrong. We didn't want to harm you or offend you. Our son loves your daughter,
Sister.
yeah, or your sister in this case. Jacob's daughter, but
Right.
The other fellow's sister, and he'll marry her. And they say to him, how can your son marry our sister? He's not circumcised. So they say, well, we'll work that out. And they go back and talk to the other men in their tribe. And the others say, look, there's these new people that have come across the river, and they want to stay here. We should be friendly with them. And it started out in a bad way. We took advantage of them, thinking that they were weak and unprotected. And Shem ben Hamor took advantage of her. We can get over the whole thing without any trouble if we all get circumcised, or if Shem gets circumcised, and then he can marry her. So they say to him, okay, go ahead with it. He comes back and he said, we'll circumcise Shem. And then he'll marry Dinah. And they say to him, the sons of Jacob, say to him, why stop with Shem? Why don't you all get circumcised? And we'll join up together. We'll be one people, determined by the circumcision, which is our sign that we're a people. And then everything will go fine. And they agree. So they all get circumcised, all the men in the Nablus tribe, let's call it. And on the I think it said the third day or the fourth day, they Simon and Levi and their coordinates, they attacked them while they were still in pain. The Bible is careful enough to tell us while they were still in pain, Simon and Levi attacked them and killed many and took their women. In other words, there's an ancient story there that about what they did to the Nablus people. And when it was all over, and they told Jacob about it, Jacob was furious, and he said, how could you do a thing like that? There are many people in this area, and we are few. And if we don't behave properly with them, they'll get together and they will take revenge on us. And so Simon and Levi answer him in one sentence. They say, would it be better to let them make a prostitute, of our sister? Meaning, if they see that they can get away with something like this, do you think we're going to be able to stay in this land that you've been promised? No. And so then God told Jacob to move from Nablus south to Bethel, and the fear of the Lord was in the hearts of the people all along the way, and they did not attack Jacob. So, and when I would tell this story that I saw in the Bible to the Bedouin I was dealing with and talking to, they say naturally they did the right thing. In other words, they said, if we don't show that we can make people suffer who bother us, we'll not be able to stay in this land. So that's an example. Now, when I met the Bedouin, as I mentioned before, pardon me.
Sure, next slide. Not yet.
Well, let's see what it is. Yeah, sure. I'll catch up with this slide in a second. But when I mentioned that they had to protect themselves, I got thrown off.
Yeah, sorry. You were saying when you tell the Bedouin your stories.
Oh, when I tell the Bedouin the stories, they say, "Bravo!
Yeah.
What tribe was that?"
Yeah.
You know, as if it was another Bedouin tribe in the Negev or in northern Israel or in Jordan or someplace like that. And because it was, as far as they were concerned, that's the way you behave. So if we have revenge, and the story shows that we have revenge, and there were other revenges when the people of King David killed the officers of King Saul. It was quite clear that they were going to take revenge on them. And David tells them, "You're not my cousin. You are, but only through my mother, not my father. You're not my cousin, and whatever revenge comes only on you, not on my family." It's all written down. You just have to look at it and see it and understand where it's coming from. So when I said before that I didn't set out to learn how nomadic or how Bedouin the early Israelites were, I set out to learn how they live, how they survive under desert conditions. And it's only through that venture that I was able to eventually read the Bible, which I found very interesting. To read the Bible and to see the connection. And it starts with, it goes in many directions. Can you, and now you see, for example, when Moses, I'm just skipping around the Bible, but when Moses leads his own people out of Egypt, we call them the Israelites. I kind of call them the Levites, because Moses was a Levite, and the Levites got a lot of mileage out of being related to Moses as the leader of their group. They became the judges, etc., and responsible for sacrifice and given free land that didn't belong to them. I mean, all of this has to be studied. I'm too old now. I've done whatever it fell into my lot to do. But if I were to hang around for another 80 some odd years, I would certainly look into these things. And I would also look into how the nomads influenced Islam. if I talk to a nomad now and I'll say, well, why do you fast during Ramadan or something? And I say, well, it comes from Islam.
Mm,
But the fact of the matter is that they fasted before they became Muslims.
right.
So you can see where this type of life had an influence on the people they lived among or lived near. And the advantage that the nomads had in the advantage that they had in influencing other people and bringing them into the Islamic religion, and before that, I would say the Jewish religion, is that they were mobile, and nobody else had that mobility and the camels and everything, because everybody else was dealing in agriculture, a little bit here, a little bit there, but they couldn't leave their fields. First of all, because the hungry nomads would eat what they planted or put their flocks and herds into their fields. And they had to, they had to submit to the nomads. And if you look at the early history of Islam and the early history of Judaism, all the wars that went on during the period of of Joshua and the judges and kings, and the Canaanites and the Philistines and the Jebusites and you name it, they eventually came to Judaism. Okay, now why am I showing you this acacia tree, which is a hardwood? Because Jethro, who was the protector and the protector of Moses before the Exodus and after the Exodus, he told him how to live. He told him how to run a desert legal system, and he told them how to live. Black tents, like you saw in the previous picture, and the roof of the holy sanctuary was made of acacia trees, which you only find in any appreciable number in that area. And sometimes you see them in the summertime when the Bedouin don't need a black tent, you see, because the tent you saw before was a black tent made from the woven wool, a black goat, what they call a Hijazi goat, that comes from the Arabian Peninsula, but it's found in all the desert areas there. And so the Bedouin tents were black, and the hairs of a black goat expand when they're wet. So in the winter time, when it's the only time you get rain, they need a black tent. And that's, say, 3/4 of the year. They're migrating. They have to have a black tent to make sure that the rainwater doesn't seep in and ruin everything. And now once the rainy season is not expected anymore, in other words, when you get down to June and July and August and September, we get a different type of tent. We get a different type of shelter. David,
Next slide.
yeah.
Do you want to explain them about why they leave the tent here without any worry?
Oh yes. Another thing is that since they don't have any structures, everything they possess is left open, is left outside. And this is the winter tent of a Bedouin family, hanging on an acacia tree, which can keep it off the ground and the insects. And people see it, and stealing what has been left behind, like a tent like that, dehumanizes a person. And one interesting thing about Bedouin law is that if you're accused of a violation and swear that you didn't do it, you become, you forget the word, you get off the hook. In other words, you can win the case.
Exonerated.
Exonerated, exactly. It was exonerated. But if you there are certain crimes that if you violate them, you cannot swear in order to exonerate yourself. Those are their 10 commandments. One, they say, if you violate your neighbor's wife, you steal what he has left behind, which is right here, or you betray a fellow traveler, because there's nobody out there to witness and give evidence for it. Can we go on?
Yes.
And now pardon, I was going to, can we go down just a few? There.
Yeah, okay.
Now, in those, I told you that they need a black wool tent, a goat hair tent in the wintertime, so because that wool is waterproof. But when there's no chance of rain, in other words, closer to the summer, as I said before, June, July, August, and September, they fold up the tents, fix them if they've been damaged during the migrations of the winter, and they collect thatch. In other words, plants in the desert that give you thatch.
Shade.
What?
That provides shade, right?
And so that they have shade. But the thatch is what provides the shade. And the thatch in Hebrew is called schach. And a house that's made from schach is a sukkah, using the dagesh in the kaf. But and now whoever wrote the Bible or wrote the story of the Exodus knew that about the Bedouin. In other words, he knew that at a certain season, they fold up the tents and they live in thatch. They live in the sukkah. And when the Exodus takes place and the Lord comes to Moses and said, you have to celebrate the Exodus in the fall of the year, not any time during the year, but the fall of the year, when we live in Sukkot. And so I brought you out of Egypt and put you into Sukkot. He doesn't say I put you into tents. I put you into Sukkot.
The thatch building, thatch shelters.
The shelters,
Yeah.
yes. Which is amazing when you think of the. Go ahead now. Should we go back to the? Yes. Now, in the laws of the dietary laws in the Bible, sacrifices mixed with bread are made in two ways in the Bible. One is on what today, if you say a frying pan, you say machvat.
Mhm.
In the Bible, a frying, this metal disc is called a machavat. And the bread that you eat is thrown onto a disc like that for about, let's say, a minute on each side.
Mhm.
And after those few minutes, it's matzah. It's matzah without the holes, because the holes only come when it dries up. In this particular case, the matzah made on a machavat, on a disc like that, a frying pan, is it's soft when it's first made, and you eat it, and it's very good. And then the next day, the end of the next day, it begins to become brittle, like a matzah that we have now. And the other way of, no, I'll just stay with this for a second, this particular bread. What I want to say is that in the Bible, it says that they ate matzah, and Pesach was first called the holiday Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah. And only later was it called Passover. But and it says we ate matzah because the yeast didn't have time to rise. Okay. Now the fact is that yeast doesn't rise if it's not cool enough, and if it's bounced around like it would be on a camelback or on a donkey back, if you went from place to place. And it is so important, this idea that Bedouin differentiate themselves from other Arabs by the type of bread they eat. I mean, this goes back so far, and it's so strong that it's undeniable. And I have heard stories from, say, the 1940s when the Jewish Agency bought up the first land in the central Negev, where Kibbutz Revivim is now. And so somebody wrote a poem. I should have had it out here.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Your book's out of the papers, is that what you mean?
No, it's this book is, well, never mind. I'm going to, somebody wrote a poem and went from tent to tent criticizing the criticizing the landowners or desert owners who sold the land for kibbutz revivim. And he mentions their name and all that. And he says, look at them. And he tells throughout the poem just what a danger it is that the Jews have moved into our territory here, and that eventually we're going to lose our land between the east and the sea. And he said, look what they do with their money that they've earned. They leave off the daughters of people who spice coffee cups, the Bedouin men, and they marry the daughters, of people who eat soft bread. And the people who eat soft bread are certain farmers, agriculturists in the desert. Now, I mean, that's. Now, I heard a poem from 100 years earlier, from the 1860s. There was a tribal war in the Negev, and one particular contestant in the war was had very close relations with peasants from the Gaza area. And in order to lambaste him and in order to denigrate him, they say, look at you. Your friends are the peasants, and you eat their bread baked in the ovens of, in the Arabic poem it says brer, which we call in Hebrew now bror chayil, which is right next to the Gaza Strip.
Right. Wow.
And then I heard a poem from 100 years earlier. Are we running out of time?
We have about 7 more minutes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. This is fine.
So I'm saying that I heard a poem from that I traced back to 300 years ago in Iraq, of a fellow a big chief who comes into, say, Baghdad or one of the towns, and stocks up for the winter migration. And the woman, who's quite a sharp woman, takes to him and invites his whole retinue to come to her palace in the desert. And she comes and she suggests to them, at night when they're talking, that they get married. And he said, how can I marry you? We are Bedouin who bake our bread in the ashes of fire, like in the tanur, as that bread is called, by Jethro to Moses. He said, we can't marry, and you are people. We are people who bake our bread in the ashes of the fire, and you are people who bake with yeast, something like that.
Right, softies.
And then I was once at a Christmas party in England, and I was talking to a scholar there, a woman who was who specialized in the ancient Middle East, Sumerian culture, Babylonian culture. She said, that's amazing. That's like the story of Era. Era was a fellow, a nomad, who wanted to marry a peasant woman. And the peasants all rose up against it. Say, how can we? You are people who bake your bread in the ashes.
Mhm.
And our bread, or the no, excuse me, the fellow Era himself says, don't belittle us. After all, our bread is delicious bread baked in the ashes of the campfire, and you are people who eat soft bread baked in
The
the
ovens.
tandoors
Yeah,
and
the
the
ovens.
oven. Yes. So first of all, you see how ancient this culture is and how it goes back just by comparing it and showing the similarities with the Bible. Now, if we have just a few more minutes.
We do. Yeah. Want to move ahead?
Yeah, okay. Oh, and well, this is a campfire that they light and let subside, and then they move the
Ashes.
they move the ashes away and put the dough in the they cover it up with the ashes, part of the ashes, and it lies in part of the ashes. And this is what they in the Bible, what Jethro tells Moses is the tanur. They can't a nomadic person can't take a stove with them.
Are you basically saying that Moses is like a civilized person kind of out of Egypt, and he's teaching him how to live in the desert?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He's really educating him in a whole different lifestyle.
In a whole different lifestyle.
Wow.
And that's what it allowed them. And Moses wants Jethro to join them.
Right.
And he says, how can we survive without you? You tell us where to migrate. You tell us where to camp.
And that's really what took the Jews 40 years to figure out.
So that, and he tells him from a Bedouin point of view, he said, I have to live with my people.
Right.
Because they protect me.
Hey, David, can we just do a few quick questions given the limited time?
Course,
is that okay?
Yes. Absolutely.
So I wanted to thank Dr. Bailey for being with us and sharing his wisdom. I've been sharing some stuff as you've been speaking, articles about you, Dr. Bailey, and then articles related to the Bedouin tents and food and stuff like that. So here are some questions I see people have asked. Number one is, did you study only the Bedouin in Israel, or have you studied all Bedouin? And is there a difference between the Bedouin in Israel and the other Bedouin who live in other parts of the Middle East?
I personally studied the Bedouin in the Negev, Israel, and in Sinai, all of Sinai, and in Jordan, less than the Negev and Sinai, because we didn't have access to Jordan to go and do studies in Jordan for quite a while. But I read about Bedouin, that scholars had written about Bedouin in other places. So I was able to compare what's done in the Negev and Sinai and what's done in Saudi Arabia, other places, Libya, even Morocco. And it's quite the same because it all has to do with surviving under desert conditions, and that has its own rules.
And what religion do the Bedouins espouse?
Islam, for the most part, Islam. Here and there are Bedouin, as in Jordan, who, from the time of the Roman Empire and then the Byzantine Empire after the Romans, are still Christian. They were Christians who were hired by the Romans in order to keep the nomads off the backs of the settled Arabs on the Jordan Israeli border. And even to this day, they're not only Christians, but they're very often they very often run the economy. They're like the bankers and the ministers of finance and people like that. Yes.
Why did the Bedouin welcome you? Why do you think that you are a welcome guest to them? What is unique about you that was enabled you to gain their confidence?
First of all, whenever I don't know about first of all, but in any case, whenever I was with them, I tried not to violate their ethos. You know, I tried to live like they were living for however long it was, whether it was a night stay, I happened to stop off with people, or whether I stayed with them for weeks. I would and travel with them. That's number one. Number two, they liked the idea that I was interested in their culture. They're ethnocentric, like a lot of people are. And that somebody would come along and listen to their poems. And then I had cassettes of poems that I would play in new camps, you know, by poets that they had heard about, Bedouin poets. And so I was an attraction, you know, Beatty's coming with Bedouin poetry. And I would imagine that to some extent, the fact that I did get active or proactive for their civil rights in Israel, and even in Sinai when we were controlling Sinai and they needed various things, and I had access to the military, so I could help them, and they saw me as a friend. And
Yeah, we
to
did.
this day, pardon?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying that I was visited last week by the grandson of the greatest poet in Sinai in recent generations. And his father, the poet's son, had married a Jewish girl from Israel. And so the boy grew up partly in Israel and partly in Sinai, in Egypt. And he was so moved. I'm not saying this to wave a flag, but just as a he was so moved to hear about somebody that his people were talking about. You know, his cousins and his uncles and his grandfather. So, and I treated them like people, and they treated me very well. I mean, they really were when I wanted to talk to them, for the most part, they talked to me, and they would answer the questions that I asked, and I tried to be judicious about who could give me the right answers. You get a feeling for that after a while.
We didn't really talk about in this program the poetry, which is, I mean, really maybe the focus of your research. So there's an archive I see online. Can you tell us about this archive online, or archive about the poetry and what you did with respect to their poetry?
Yes. Look, there are certain subjects. I most often took a little tape recorder about this big. Here we have one right here.
I saw it before.
Yeah.
Let's see, there it is.
There it is.
Here, a second here.
I took a little tape recorder like this with me, and when I did find somebody that could recite poetry, because my first thrust into the culture was through their poetry. which was very bold, you could say, because my knowledge of Arabic wasn't, I hadn't majored in Arabic literature. And I had to, but I recorded, and I found older people who knew the poetry and appreciated it, who would sit with me and go over line by, I would read the poem, or we would listen to it from the tape recorder, and I would have it. But what I want to say in answer to your question, the archive, I have about 350 cassettes, tape cassettes, that on which I recorded all these people, older people for the most part. And I kept them, and I always wrote down what I understood from them, and in other words, what the subjects were, who the people were, and all of that. And at one point I decided, I'm not getting younger, and it would be a good idea if these were on file. So the Hebrew University in Jerusalem made me a deal that they would open a file, open an archive, if I would go through all of the tapes and say what was being discussed.
Right.
And
you did.
And I did. So that, and already the library in Jerusalem is in touch with the library in Abu Dhabi. And and conferences are planned and things of that sort. And they're very interested in this material. They even found stories about their own people from Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We have Irit Burke. I think she just left, was one of your students in 1980 at University of Tel Aviv University. So I think she just left, but she wanted to send her regards to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
She asked a question which we can't get into today, which is the challenges today for Bedouin society. We did run a CSP program about that, so I will share it in the follow-up. And obviously there are challenges for the Bedouin. You kind of mentioned some of them, but
yes,
it's not the focus of this program. But it is something I just wanted to mention that Irit brought up. David, is there any last thing you wanted to bring up before we break?
All I want to say is that Clinton did touch on the fact that in pre-Islamic Arabia, this was the reality. The reality is describing now. Nothing's changed very much, and Muhammad's message was very attractive because it allowed it to become its own clan rules, its own hamula in a way that allowed them all to come together as a larger tribe in a way, and it was powerful, and it was and Judaism had similar attractions as did Christianity. So that's the mystery that we're looking at, who we are as a people. That's why today's topic was so incredibly relevant and important. And this as we're trying to unravel our own past, this is one of the biggest clues of all. And I think Clinton, in my mind, has provided one of the major keys for that.
That's terrific. People have asked, in this slide, can you just, as a final thing, can you explain what the slide is?
They want to know this slide.
This one, it's a holy tomb. In other words, they have when somebody who has been virtuous, or they perceive to have been virtuous and a good person, somebody who lives well with, nowadays they call him Allah, but could have been Yahweh or Adonai at one time. They give him a special tomb, and they make pilgrimages, sometimes just a family. The next slide, I think. Here's a family, the mother, the father, and the goat to be slaughtered, and the children, they're going to this same holy tomb. in order to ask a favor from the person who's buried there,
Interceding.
on the logic that he will intercede for them because he is close to God, which accounts for his having behaved properly, having been a holy person.
Right. I want to, this is a treat before we say goodbye. I want you to see something. First of all, they're sacrificing the goat, as Clinton was just saying. And I want the thing, I want you to explain this to them and then show them your car. That's what I want you to do.
Show them
Show them this and I'll show them your Jeep after this one. Okay.
Yes. You see, they do believe, like we believe, we can find it in the Bible as well, that you create proximity and spiritual proximity with blood. And blood has special qualities and effects. And so here there was a holiday. I was visiting some Bedouin, and we slaughtered a goat, which was to God because of the holiday. And so one of the old men took a bowl of blood, and he goes and he puts blood on everything that
Wants to bless.
that he wants to bless, that he wants God's presence to be with it all the time. And so, do you want to put the next one
Exactly.
on? And here, these are drops on the children's eyes that the father puts between the eyes of the children. And como Yule totafot benenechem, between your eyes.
It should be as a sign.
It would be as a sign that you've had the inspiration of the contact with God. And they would put it on the tents as well. And so it's I find it quite amazing, really, that
I'm gonna finish this. I want to show them the next one. Ready?
yes, what's
I want them to see this one here.
Oh, I was once in a very remote place in Sinai, stayed there for several weeks, and I stopped off with these fellows, and they wanted to slaughter a goat for me. And very often when they slaughter a goat for a guest, a stranger, they'll dab the blood on the front of his camel, so that when he goes other places and people say, who slaughtered for you? Because they'll ask, he can say so and so, and then they get credit for having been generous. There's a lot to say about hospitality and
the Bible.
And Abraham's reception of the messengers, and lots of acceptance of them afterward. And there are a few cases that are very close to Bedouin life.
Yeah, and in this case, they blessed Clinton with blood on his. He didn't have a camel; he had his Jeep, so they put it on the Jeep as his blessing when he left.
Yes.
Wow. It's pulled many times.
Thank you very much. That's my wife, Maya. That's here.
Say hi, Maya. If I go.
Oh, the other way.
Say hi, Maya. Say shalom.
מה?
זה פשוט המון אנשים אומרים לך שלום.
Please thank Maya for having us all in your study today.
Yeah.
Yes. And also she brought us some apples. She didn't bring us
this is Bedouin hospitality. If you all want some here.
Here's some apples.
Okay, everyone take an apple.
Sometimes I get visited by Bedouin and I can't slaughter a sheep, so I order a pizza.
Yeah.
But they understand.
So David and Dr. Bailey, thank you so much for this opportunity. And wow, an opportunity to spend someone who's made history in a field, and for showing us how the Bedouin are connected to our tradition, how we are connected to the Bedouin tradition. So when people go to Shul the Shabbat, you open up a Chumash and you read stories. Think about today's program. We'll have some follow-up as well. And when we get back to Israel, Dr. Bailey, we look forward to seeing you in person. I'm glad I had the opportunity to have coffee with you, and I'll have to share with people your stories about Ben Gurion, and we'll do a different program about you and Ben Gurion, because
My pleasure.
great stories. So I wanted to thank everybody. Can you unshare the screen for 1 second, David?
Sure, one moment. Hold on. Stop share.
I want to thank everybody for coming to the program, sticking with us till the very end. Everybody, those who stuck to the end got even more information. Yeah. I see new people to CSP and regulars. It's good to see you. It's good to see Bible scholars. It's good to see Lance Aronson on a program. That's always, a nice thing. But, Lance was hanging out in a Bedouin tent with CSP and David Mendelsohn just a few months ago. So we touched on the subject. We went a lot deeper today. People have asked where to get your book. They said it's a little expensive on Amazon, Clinton, but I guess that's where you get it, right? I mean, I guess they can buy used copies maybe.
Yeah. I'm sorry that these academic publishers charge a lot of money.
Right.
And that's called Bedouin Culture in the Bible. And it was published at Yale. Okay. And it's been published in Arabic in Beirut and in Hebrew in Tel Aviv. So
terrific. So with that, David Mendelsohn, will see you on Thursday. The rest of you, maybe we'll see you tomorrow. It's Tuesday. Take care. It's always good to have Dr. Ahuva Ho with us. She's processing all this information. It'll come out in something. I know she'll be teaching at CBI. And nice to see new people as well. Please join us for more programs. Neil Eisenberg, is always nice to have you with us from the great city or the great area of Philadelphia. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Good night.
And
From
bye, Dr. Bailey. Bye, David. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
It was a pleasure.
It was definitely a pleasure. Thank you.